Welcome to Developers Corner. I'm Rob Langton from developmentready.com.au, and we are joined here this morning with Andrew Antonas, Principal of Matrix Property Group. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Rob, thank you for having me this morning as well.
Tell us about your career in the property industry to date.
Well, Rob, it all began 30 years ago, and I finished uni and didn't know what to do. So I wanted to be in sales, and I thought to myself, look, I'll just go to a couple of interviews and see what sort of sales I'd really like. So I went to, one of my interviews was most memorable. It was a small software company from Seattle, run by a young guy. I felt they had no prospects and really didn't want to go with them. That company, of course, was Microsoft. So I made the right decision there by not going with them, and I went into real estate. And here I am today, 30 years later, poorer but wiser.
Tell us about Matrix Property Group. How did it get its start, and where is it at now?
Well, that's an interesting question because Matrix Property, I don't know where it came from, and it's not from the movie. It just arrived in my head one night in my sleep. We've been in operation since 2004 as a company, but it's been incorporated by me since '97, so it's been around for quite a while. Today we're just a small boutique company. There's 11 of us. We're in North Sydney. We operate in New South Wales and the ACT. And we're known as development site marketing people. That's all we do. We don't sell industrial property. We don't sell hotels in Fiji. We don't lease property. All we do is to sell development land.
And tail end of 2017, how's it been for you, and how's it been for the marketplace more generally?
It's been a very odd year this year because it's a transition year. What we saw was a boom, and we saw a period of time when I can only describe it as the biggest capital inflow into this country for development projects and real estate broadly. But the players, it was an enormous exponential rise in the number of players. It went from a certain level to another level because of the overseas entrants, and especially the ones from China. The whole dynamic changed in a matter of 3 to 4 years.
And tell us about who's buying projects at the moment. Is it local developers, is it offshore developers, or a mixture of both?
Rob, that's an interesting question. What we're seeing is that the local developer who has been around for a long time, that has a very solid balance sheet, is coming back into the market. The market was dominated by overseas buyers for 4 to 5 years and quite solidly, and that crowded out a lot of the local developers. What we're seeing now is a lot of those overseas have really taken a back seat as they're working out what they've bought and how to develop. So that's the next phase in their projects. The local developers now are the ones that are looking for projects to take them forward for the next 3 to 5 years.
And inversely, who's selling sites? Is it developers that have held the site for a couple of years and were looking at flipping it, or is it sort of, mum and dads that have owned the site, families that have owned the site for 20, 30 years?
Well, Rob, that's a very good question. If I look at, say, 10 of our deals at the moment that we've got on the books, probably 20% are families that have owned property for some time. Another 30% are probably funds, and that is everything from a sophisticated fund for smaller investors right up to the large REITs are selling land. But we're also seeing developers who have a surplus of projects. They've got an extensive portfolio. They can't or will not develop all of those and wouldn't mind getting a bit cashed up for the future. So we're seeing developers selling the ones that are not probably the best in their portfolio, but they're ones that'll suit a lot of other people.
And how are developers configuring their projects here in Sydney at the moment? Is it apartments still? Is it townhouses, mixed use? Tell us a little bit more about that.
That's a good question. Look, everything's about financing now, and it's what the banks will finance. So the banks really traditionally would finance anything from a townhouse development right up to 2,000 units. When it comes to apartments, the banks are a bit bearish on medium to high-rise apartments, and it's interesting because I've been to quite a few bank breakfasts and functions talking about what their the lending policies, and what they're saying is we prefer to be lending on smaller projects, ones that are a bit more risk-free for the bank and for the developer. But we're seeing the more experienced developer, the larger developer, still carrying on like nothing's changed, because they've got a pipeline that they've got to keep running. But we're also seeing a lot of other developers concentrating on smaller projects because they're the ones that can be funded at the moment.
Now, you also have got some sites and do quite a lot of work down in the Canberra marketplace.
Yeah, look, Canberra's an interesting one. It's a very tight market down there, and we're the outsider. But I enjoy Canberra very much. It's a bit of a Melbourne town, so Rob, you might relate to that, being from Melbourne. But I grew up down there, so it's a very tight market, a very sophisticated market. A lot of money down there, but what we're seeing is a lot of those developers in Canberra want to be interstate. They want to be in Sydney. So we're having a lot of conversations with people about Canberrans wanting to invest in Sydney, and a few in Sydney wanting to invest, especially some of our Chinese developers are saying to us, what have you got in Canberra? Because we wouldn't mind at least looking at Canberra, not yet investing in Canberra, but they're looking at Canberra.
And what other trends or patterns are you seeing?
Generally in the market, look, we're in a transition period, so it's come off from a boom and we're heading towards we don't know what. But what I can see, there's a few things that I know for sure, and one is that we're seeing a bit of a decrease in prices, and that's about 10 to 15% for development land and end product. And that has been pretty apparent. We've seen that over the last 6 to 12 months. We're going to see a little bit more price fall, but not by a lot, maybe another 5%. And then we're going to see something really, really strange. But we've seen the movie before. So we're going to have 7 to 8 years of just no great price rises, no great price falls, and what I always call an equilibrium market. That is, one buyer, one seller. So it's probably the perfect market. And it's something we haven't seen since 2004, 2005 to about 2007. And what we saw was a bit of an equilibrium market where if there's a particular property, you'll always have a buyer there at a price. You'll have a lot more buyers at lower prices, but you'll see one buyer at the price that triggers the transaction with the vendor.
Just on that, with regard to buyers, how are you finding is the best approach to attract buyers? You've obviously got an established database, but are you still going down the print avenue, or is it all digital these days?
Rob, look, I hate to say, but print is pretty close to dead, unfortunately, and the newspapers are getting thinner and thinner and thinner. It's a shame, it really is, but everything's online now. So what you're doing, the portals really are important now. Our database is absolutely essential. We're finding that people are very, very time poor. So they want information and snippets of it quickly and very accessible. So for us now, if we've got a property, it's an expression of interest because that gets the conversation going about a property. Auctions tend to be a little bit more, it's too much pressure for people. People are a bit more relaxed, I find, especially in Sydney. They want to have a conversation about a property, pick up the phone, have a chat about it. If it's for them, they'll take it further. But just to go back to your question, I want to specifically talk about that. What's working in terms of the campaign mix is the digital ad or e-ad via our clientele database, which by the way runs into we're between 20 and 25,000 contacts on our database. It's quite big. Active about 11,000, so that's quite a few. People and a lot of tastes there and a lot of different businesses that we've got to tailor make a lot of our offerings for. In terms of the campaign mix, so that's important, the e-ads to our database, the portals, the development ready portal that you've got is something that is essential, and we're encouraging our clients to advertise, but they don't like spending money. But when they're forced to, they will. And I think the market is going from boom to remember, equilibrium market. That's when they've got to start spending money. And they've got to start spending money on things like the portals. They're not going to spend money on press. I think press is dead, to be honest. I think it's a terrible thing to say, but but it's money not well spent. And the portals and the digital mix to me is value for money.
And in regard to the off-market sphere, tell us about when you're dealing with clients that don't have any vendor-paid advertising or marketing. How are you finding the off-market marketplace at the moment?
Look, the off-market marketplace is one of look. They're the people that are sort of hush-hush about their property, and we're finding that people are happy to start talking about their property because there's less buyers in the marketplace. So really, there's got to be some compelling reasons for having it as an off-market offering, so to speak. And one is confidentiality. Another one is that they're going through the development process, so they're not development ready, so to speak, or it's approved as a development. So it's a sensitive stage in their development process. But really, people are happy to have their property promoted, and really it's the portals and it's the database effective marketing which is what it's all about now.
And obviously in Sydney, where are the hotspots for development in your opinion at the moment? Where are your selling sites?
Look, the hotspots really anything from 15 to 20 kilometres from the city centre, northwest, southwest for subdivisions. Townhouse sites anywhere across Metropolitan. We're also finding that it's some of the regional areas where we're getting a bit of traction, and places like Orange, Wollongong, Newcastle, and we're also finding that there's different types of product now. So, for example, we're getting a lot of interest for aged care facilities. So, and that type of land is quite specific because it has to be in a certain area where there's bed licences or near a hospital and near facilities, medical, etc. So we're getting quite specific needs in terms of land. We are finding that, and also people that want the land for a specific use. For example, hotelier, serviced apartments, an educational facility, such as that.
Very good. In terms of councils, are you finding that they're pro-development in and around Sydney at the moment?
The councils? Look, there's been a lot of land rezoned, and there's a lot of talk that maybe there's been too much in certain areas and not enough in other areas. Look, I think that's that mix is or that proportion of developable land to demand is starting to it's starting to equate to become equal now. So we've had a huge excess demand, and that's driven up prices, but prices were driven up for a number of reasons, and that was just a lack of supply, overseas buyers, low interest rates. All these variables drove the market to I can only describe a casino status. We're seeing less of that now, and what we're seeing, in my view, is that we're going to have, back to that equilibrium market. Supply, demand is almost neck and neck. So I just feel that there's been enough supply in certain areas. In other areas there hasn't been enough. There's a lot of talk about these metro stations and how they're going to be developed. So I think that's the big opportunity at the moment. How the metro metro sites are developed, how the railway sites are developed, how the inner land or the inner city land stocks are developed. So that to me is and that's something for the Urban Development Institute. That's probably not for me.
So Andrew, just finally, where do you see the market in the next 6 to 12 months heading?
That's a good question. I think what we're going to see is much of what we saw this year, but with a slight decrease in price, maybe another 4 or 5%. And then we're going to see something very interesting for the next 5 to 7 years. And that is just no great price falls, no great price increases. And like I said before, an equilibrium market, one buyer, one seller. And then I think what we have there is what I always call a perfect market and a fair market. It means that anybody who wants to buy can buy, anybody who wants to sell can sell.
Andrew, thanks for joining us here on Developers Corner.
Rob, a pleasure, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for watching.